Well, welcome, friends. I'm Robert Mealy. I'm the orchestra director for the Boston Early Music Festival, and in the production of Orfeo, I'll be the concertmaster for, or I was the concertmaster for these productions. I'm joined today by the distinguished Thomas Forrest Kelly, the Morton B. Knafel Research Professor of Music at Harvard University, who has a remarkably deep knowledge of Orfeo, having lived with it for many, many years. I had the pleasure of joining Professor Kelly in many of his first night lectures at Harvard while I was running the Baroque Orchestra there. And I would strongly recommend everyone who's watching this to investigate the book that came out of those lectures, which is First Night's 5 Musical Premieres, published by Yale University Press, which has just a fantastic chapter on the details of the first performance of Monteverdi's Orfeo. Welcome, Tom. And I wonder if you could just set the stage for us and tell us a little bit about the scene in Mantua, what it looks like, what was going on there, who these people were.
Sure. Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this broadcast. I saw the show both times, both productions, and it's really wonderful. And as everybody here listening will already know, it's the greatest piece of music ever written of all time, and nobody will ever be able to top it. So you and I think, both have a real fondness for this piece, and I hope the people who are watching along do also. What it is at the time it was first performed in the palace of the Dukes of Mantua, everybody said that we're going to a play. The Duke is putting on a play tomorrow night. And it's the weirdest thing. What they say is that all the actors are going to sing their parts. I can't imagine what that'll be like. I think I'll go and see. We have a word for plays in which all the people sing their parts. We call it opera, but that word didn't exist for that purpose, and the genre didn't exist. They were making it up. So let's go back and just for a minute. This is not going to be exactly the way it is in Jordan Hall, but it's going to be, it'll help us when we go into Jordan Hall to think about what was going on then and what was Monteverdi up to. So with your permission, I'd like to just show a couple of pictures. Maybe everybody knows very well. Here's the city of Mantua in northern Italy, surrounded by lakes. The lakes are there by damming the river Mincio. It's one of the many, many small city-states run by dukes or princes or popes or whatever. The idea of Italy didn't exist. It's a geographical thing, but certainly not a political thing in this period. We're talking about 1607. And it still looks kind of that way. If you approach it across one of the lakes, there's the palace of the Dukes of Mantua. When you look at Mantua from the air, you can still see around the edges the outline of the medieval fortifications. See the arrow-shaped bastions are along here. Anyhow, and as you go over to the right-hand corner, you have a bird's eye view of the palace of the Dukes of Mantua. It was not just where the Duke lived, but a very large extended family, a lot of bureaucrats, a lot of business went on because there was a lot to govern. All the little white stuff off to the left is the big piazza in front of the palace, and the picture is taken on market day, so those are the tops of a lot of little market stalls. But the palace was thought at the time, how people knew these things, I don't know. It was thought at the time to be the biggest building in the world. And it certainly is a very big building and a very complicated one that grew in lots of little pieces. You get to it by going into the piazza we saw from the air through this arch. And straight ahead of you is the facade of the Cathedral of Mantua, not part of the palace, but right outside the front door. It didn't look like that in Monteverdi's day. That's a Baroque 18th century facade on the cathedral. Here's what it looked like in his day. That's a different facade. And of course, they weren't all having wars and pillaging and plundering in the piazza all the time. This is a famous moment when the Gonzaga family took over the rulership of Mantua. But back to a calmer day, the building on the right is called the Palazzo del Capitano, and that's the main ancient medieval building, but there are lots of other parts behind it. It's through there that you go into the palace and you enter one of the many, many courtyards and hanging gardens. There's actually a medieval fortress built into the palace called the Castello San Giorgio. There's a great big Basilica of Santa Barbara, so big that you can't even get a good view of it from anywhere. It's sort of surrounded by other parts of the palace. There are long galleries designed to display the sculpture, the art of the Gonzaga, the ruling family. That, by the way, that's my wife Peggy walking away from us. There's a big courtyard designed for cavalry displays. There were big collectors of horses, and this allows the spectators to stand on the level where we are and the horses to do their thing down below with the view out over the water. Pretty nice digs. Well, somewhere in that palace, in 1607, on the very last possible day before Lent started and you couldn't have any more festivities, was given a small performance for the Learned Academy of Mantua in a room in the palace. It was a long time before anybody was able to figure out what room it was, but a couple of recent discoveries having to do with ambassadors from Venice writing back and people figuring out which were the rooms that the late Duchess of Ferrara had the use of, we now know what room it was. This is a picture of the room where Orfeo was first performed, but it's a fake. This scene is actually about the size of a shoebox, and you'll see it if you go to the Music Museum in Paris, where they have scale models of places where famous first performances were given. So you get Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Handel's Messiah, Rite of Spring, stuff like that, and Orfeo. But they totally made it up. At the time, nobody knew what the room was, but it looks kind of like a room in a palace, but we know the actual room now. Here is the ground plan of the palace of the Dukes of Mantua, given me by the architect of the palace a few years ago. And the red arrow shows where the public goes in now to visit the palace. And the green line points to how you would have gone in Monteverdi's day. And the green X shows where the original room is. It's actually a convenient place because it allows people to come in from the outside who really ought not to penetrate into the noble parts of the palace. And it allows people from the palace to come into the performance without having to go out and mix with riffraff on the outside. So it's in a kind of a no man's land between the two. Anyhow, to go there, you start out here. If you're a peasant like me, you probably wouldn't even be allowed to go. But if I had been elected a member of the academy, I could go, and I would go into the piazza. And instead of going into the Piazza del Capitano there, I'd go through this lower yellow building to the right, through this arch, and into the courtyard in there. I then turn left, and I look at the garden, and I see the wing that our performance is going to be given in, on the ground floor of this very ancient wing that's been refurbished a bunch of times. You go in a door, and instead of going through the door with the glass panes, which leads to the corridor that comes in from the piazza and also to the main part of the palace, just before you go through that door, you turn right. And in front of you is a very handsome Renaissance doorway. And the architect says, this is it. This is the room where Orfeo was first performed. Your little heart goes pity-pat. You think, this is so great. I'm just going to see it. He opens the door, and what you see is a bunch of hanging fluorescent lights, a bunch of people sitting at tables counting the money of the tickets of the people who had bought tickets to go tour the palace. It's a back office operation for the tourist museum of the palace. What a disappointment. But anyhow, you get to look around and you can see that it is a handsome Renaissance room. You can see that it has 3 big windows on the right-hand side. Given that the performance was probably in the daytime, they would have had to cover them up with these curtains, or I hope better ones. Maybe you can see just beyond that white screen the top of a doorway. So there's a doorway at the back of the room that would be useful for entrances and exits from a backstage thing if you set up a stage at the end of the room away from the door you came in. So maybe it could look like this, maybe it wouldn't look like that. The basic idea, though, I think, is that these learned gentlemen, the author of the play was a man named Alessandro Striggio, and he was a member of the Academy and a very learned gentleman, and he wrote this play in beautiful Italian verse It's a play about the story of Orpheus, and it's a play that's going to be sung. So what better story than the greatest mortal singer who ever lived? It's a story about music, and it starts off by somebody coming out on stage and saying, "I am music. You nobles of Mantua, be silent. I'm going to tell you the story of Orpheus, that great singer." All that happens in this room, and what they were doing was actually trying to recreate classical drama, the tragedy of ancient Greece and Rome. They built a theater in that room. It probably didn't look like this one, but this is a classical theater built by another learned academy in the city of Vicenza. This is the famous Teatro Olimpico built by the architect Andrea Palladio. And it's meant to look like a classical theater, even with the clouds overhead, so we're supposed to think we're outdoors. So the basic idea was this group of gentlemen, they were mostly gentlemen, and then they hired the guy whose job it was to do what he was told. And when music was needed, he said, "Yes, sir. How long does it need to be and how fast?" His name was Claudio Monteverdi. How many of us remember the name of Alessandro Striggio? And how many of us remember the name of Claudio Monteverdi? Anyhow, they thought they were recreating classical drama, and it has all the hallmarks of classical drama. It has a prologue who's a character who stands outside the drama. In the case of Orfeo, it's the personification of music. It tells a classical myth. It has 5 acts. It has a chorus that is part of the action, but also tells us what we need to know. Every now and then it gives you the moral that you're supposed to draw from this. There's a choral ode at the end of every one of the acts. It's in noble, elevated poetry. It's everything you want in the classical drama. And of course, what these gentlemen understood, they may have had it wrong, but what they understood was that in classical drama, the reason it was so effective, the reason it moved audiences so, is that all of the singers sang their parts to the accompaniment of the kitara, the sort of Greek lyre. So they said, well, let's do that, and let's have a kitara, but we don't know what a kitara is, so let's make a big plucked thing, and we'll make a big one. Instead of a kitara, we'll call it a chitarrone. So they invented this great big long-necked instrument, which you'll see, specifically for this kind of historical recreation. So you might say that the first performance of Orfeo not only was the first opera, but the first kind of early music revival. They thought they were doing one thing. We think they were inventing opera. But in any case, we have the good fortune of having the original score printed in Venice a couple of years later, probably at Monteverdi's expense, but there are just about no printed scores of 17th century operas. So the fact that we have this one, and the fact that this one tells us all sorts of things that we need to know. It says, this ritornello, this little instrumental piece, was played by 5 strings, a chitarrone, a clavicembalo, a partridge in a pear tree. And what it says about all those things is not, this should be played by so-and-so, but this was played by 5 strings, or it was accompanied by the harpsichord. That is, it's a description. It's a memory book. It's like the souvenir program you buy at a Broadway show. It's about what happened. And without that information, we would have no information about Orfeo at all. And in my view, one of the greatest pieces of music and greatest pieces of drama that ever existed would be lost to us, and it would be a very, very, very sad thing. So that's then. That's what it was like then, maybe. And what's it going to be like now? Well, I don't know. Those of us who will see it, I don't know how the video is going to be. It was enormously effective, I thought, in Jordan Hall. It was true in lots of ways to the spirit of Orfeo. And at the same time, it had to be adapted to modern needs and geography and so forth.
I think one of the beautiful things about the BEMF production is that it takes this angle that's interesting, that in a way it really represents a group of players who are travel worn. They arrive on stage weary, their costumes are a little smudged.
Yep.
Which might well have been like the touring companies that came through Mantua to do plays on occasion.
Sure.
I think one of the wonderful things about this production is that it brings out the Tom, what you just mentioned about the role of the chorus, where actually a lot of the crucial moments, the the messages that they want to get through to you, where the chorus really tells the moral of the story. You get it in these beautiful, Gilbert Blanc, our stage director, made these beautiful scrolls that the chorus unrolls. So
Yes.
not only do you get to hear it, but you get to see it. You kind of really remember the message. That's often like,
and
love
you're
wisely.
reminded that part of the role of the chorus is to interpret the importance and the significance of the drama to the audience, in case you missed it. There's a wonderful moment, if I can, I don't mean to spend the whole time of this conversation, but the chorus very often sings, it marks the end of an act. You have a choral ode to show the end of a classical act. So we have beautiful lament over the death of Eurydice. At the end of each act, there's some beautiful choral stuff. But maybe the greatest demonstration of how the chorus works is in Act 2, which starts off with just the most amazing rollicking music there could be. It's just one happy song after another, all sounding exactly like Monteverdi's Scherzi Musicali, which he published in the same year. And everybody happy, 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 happy. And then somebody runs on stage and says, "Stop, I have terrible news." She says, "Ai, casuacerbo." And everybody stops, and she, of course, is the person who's bringing the terrible news of the death of Eurydice. And she says that, and then people are just sort of stopped in their tracks. And then one of the bystanders, who happens to be a member of the chorus are, of course, people, either nymphs and shepherds in the upstairs acts, or they're infernal spirits in the infernal acts. One of them then echoes what, once they understand this is bad news, one of them echoes, "Ai, casuacerbo." And finally, word gets out to everybody, and the whole chorus sings, "Ai, casuacerbo." And what they're doing is actually singing in the same kind of reciting style that she is. It takes a heap of listening, but what Monteverdi does is take the messenger's music and give it to the bass of the chorus, "Ai, casuacerbo," and harmonize it with the other voices so that they are actually speaking in speaking rhythm, the same rhythm that she spoke before, so that they are clearly participants in the action. And yet, by the end of the act, that "Ai, casuacerbo" becomes a kind of a choral refrain. And at the very end of the act, the chorus adds to "Ai, casuacerbo" their own little moralizing chorus. So they start off "Ai, casuacerbo," and they say, "Joys are not won forever. You may think you're happy, but as whoever climbs the highest has the biggest fall." So that's the other role of the chorus. And to watch in the course of Act 2, the chorus turn from the one to the other is, for me, a stroke of dramatic and musical genius.
I find it amazing that it's incredible also that Monteverdi has taken this incredibly deeply solo role of the monody and transformed it, kaleidoscoped it into this madrigal suddenly. I think one of the things for me about this opening is just that Monteverdi I always forget that he's 40 years old when he writes this. This is not a young, this is not like his first production.
Right.
He's already produced 6 books of madrigals. And what you first see when this is an art that the people who had come to this production would have participated in, presumably. They were all distinguished, they were all well-trained aristocrats who would have known how to sing, who would have known how to participate in this kind of madrigal entertainment.
Yep.
But gradually, as the drama goes on, it becomes much more of a modern, moving into this new world of monody. So actually in Act 5, you move from this great community you have at the beginning to just Orfeo all by himself, which is just such a remarkable scene.
It's an amazing thing, Act 5. What Robert, maybe everybody knows about this, but the real new thing is the actors speaking their parts. And that's what some people call monody, or you might call it recitativo, whatever. But essentially, it's people delivering their lines in spoken rhythm, but with pitches and with harmonies underneath played by an assortment of chord playing instruments. And that's the new thing. And if you do nothing but that, it gets a little bit boring. And one of the great things about Orfeo is that it's full of great instrumental tunes and songs and choruses, in addition to having this reciting stuff, which is passionately dramatic at its good moments. And Robert is right that as the show goes along, it gets more and more like that. And Act 5, which is what happens after the course, the central scene of the whole Orpheus myth, when Orpheus goes down to the underworld and negotiates with Pluto and is allowed to bring Eurydice back with him on condition that he not look back. Of course, what did you do? What do we all do? We're all so dumb, you know. That's what the main thing about the myth of Orpheus really is. Do I have to get out of my nice warm bed and go to class? Couldn't I just stay here just this once? My heart tells me one thing, my head tells me another thing. What shall I do? That's why the Orpheus myth resonates some. Anyway, he does look back, as we all know, and he's ejected into the upper world. And the whole of Act 5, except for the amazing little bit at the end, is Orpheus wandering alone in the land that used to make him happy and that now the sight of which makes him sad. But this monologue he goes through is amazing. It seems long, and it is long, but it's passionately interesting. It starts off, he's singing to the trees, and he's seeing this land that once I loved is now so hateful. And the echo comes back from the mountain, and it's a famous Renaissance, early Baroque trick that you have words coming back to you, and then he starts a dialogue with the echo. And then he turns to think about Eurydice. She's not there, of course. And so he kind of looks up and said, you were so beautiful. There was no woman like you. You're charming. He goes singing the praises of Eurydice. And then he says, and as a matter of fact, you outshine all women. In fact, no other woman can hold a candle to you. In fact, all other women, despicable, horrible, lie telling. And he goes like totally off the deep end. It's a mad scene. It seems to me the whole of Act 5 is a progressive mad scene. And maybe, as you know, the great big surprise comes right then, just as Orpheus is totally going to lose it. You can tell he's crazy. Nobody says things like that. Nobody. Just as he's done it, Apollo, his father, the god of music, but also the god of balance in all things, comes down from heaven to the accompaniment of an amazing piece of music that's really important in this thing. Apollo comes down and says, boy, you're losing it. You're out of balance. I'm the god of balance. Get in this flying cloud and go up to heaven with me. We will sing, and you will be with her among the stars. And the chorus rush on and sing happy, happy, happy. And that's the end of the show. But that monologue, I think, and the increasing intensity of it and the change of focus as Orpheus gradually loses his sense of balance and order is just beautifully written by the poet, and also, I think, beautifully set to music by Monteverdi. I've heard people say Act 5 is boring. I've even heard of people ending the show when Orpheus is ejected from the upper world, then they ring the curtain down and say, that was Monteverdi's Orfeo. Well, man, you haven't even heard anything till you get to Act 5.
That's fantastic. Tom, I love that you mentioned the detail of the coffee table book that got published 2 years after the Orfeo production. The score that has just so much information for us, not only just exactly who sings what, but also who plays what.
Yes.
And that continues through the score. One of the most wonderful things for me is the detailed descriptions of what the continuo does. Like, for example, that moment when Orfeo turns around.
And there's silence, and then nothing but an organ plays. Before it was, I've forgotten, it was a harpsichord and a cello or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he turns around and everything changes. Everything changes. It's great. It's a wonderful moment.
Yeah. I just love how incredibly rich the instrumental colors are in this opera. We go from everything from the strings that often seem to represent the human element or the element of joy in the ritornelli, but also can represent the lyre of Orpheus for various moments. And as you say, with this extraordinary moment just before Apollo, this incredibly evocative little ritornello that you get just a couple times through the piece.
Yeah.
But then the amazing effect when you go down to hell in the middle of this, which is a very different sound, right?
And he indicates that in the score at the end. It's really beautifully done. The first two acts happen above ground, and Act 5 happens above ground after Orpheus is ejected again. And the third and fourth acts are on the edge of and in the realm of Pluto. So trying to get across the river Styx in Act 4 and negotiating with Pluto in Act 5. And at the end of Act 2, when a beautiful string ritornello plays that we know very, very well because it also bookended the prologue, that thing, and there's a notice in the score that says, here the violins and harpsichords fall silent and the cornetos and trombones and regals begin and the scene changes. So Monteverdi is really saying the change of scene is also going to be a change of sound. And so all of those brass, all the wind instruments that play in Acts 4 and 5 kind of represent the dark world of Pluto. I don't think corneto players like that very much because they're also a very bright, very happy, very beautiful sound. Monteverdi is using a kind of symbolism here, but you're right. When Orpheus sings his totally happy song, when he's been told he can get her out, suddenly two violins play. And I don't think those are the violins of the Arcadian fields. I think those, as you say, that's Orpheus playing his lyre. That's the sound of a happy man. And then when we go back to Act 5, we have that same little ritornello played by the strings that said goodbye to the upper world at the end of Act 2. It says hello to the upper world at the beginning of Act 5. And here comes the really unhappy Orpheus back into the world that he used to love.
Tom, could you say something about just the role of Orpheus in this opera as the greatest singer ever? How Monteverdi deals with how to represent that in music?
It's hard to know, isn't it? Actually, the role of Orfeo was sang by one of the very great singers of all time, a guy named Francesco Razzi, who could really do it. But as we've been saying, although there are sort of happy tunes and things that sound like songs in the first part, in the happy part of Orfeo, and there's things that sound like a song at the end, most of it is done in the kind of speaking style, the reciting style that was the totally new thing. And somewhere that's neither of those things is something that Monteverdi saves for the most important moment in Orpheus's life. And that is when he's got to try to use everything he's got to charm his way across the river Styx. The river Styx, as you know, is where the dead cross that to get to the world of Pluto. And Charon carries people in his boat across the river Styx. And Orpheus arrives at the edge of the river, and there's Caronte standing there saying, you can't come across this river. And Orpheus, after saying a little prayer, I know what he's doing. He's saying a little prayer to Apollo, and this amazing little sound, this little ritornello plays that turns out to be the same ritornello that plays when Apollo comes down in a cloud at the end. We're not sure what it is in Act 3, but it might be. But he's gathering his forces. He's doing a little Tai Chi. He's doing centering exercises. I don't know what he's doing, but this little thing plays, and then he launches into the most amazing piece of virtuosic singing that anybody ever sang. If you could see it, I don't have a page up here in my thing, but if you could see what it looks like in Monteverdi's score, you would say, no human being can sing that stuff. And the fact is, this is not your average human being who's singing this. This is the son of Apollo, the son of the god of music, the guy who with his lyre in the past has charmed the birds and the beasts and the rocks even. So this is Monteverdi trying to show us one way of trying to get across the river, which is to give it all the virtuosity you've got. And the song he sings is so amazing. By the end of it, though, he's really down to just singing slowly and passionately instead of elaborately at the beginning. And despite that, everybody says Orpheus, by the power of his singing, charms Caronte and gets across the river. That's wrong. He sings his heart out. And Caronte says, that was really, really pretty, but I can't let you across the river. You know, Pluto would be furious if I let you across the river. So it doesn't work, actually, in the long run. What actually works is magic music comes from the sky, and Caronte goes to sleep, and he steals the boat. Well, guess what that magic music from the sky is? It's the same music that that played just before he sang. And I think it's Apollo putting Caronte to sleep. And then we learned that for sure it is Apollo when it plays while Apollo himself appears at the end of the opera. So the whole thing is tied together musically by Monteverdi in the most brilliant way. Think about that sort of above ground ritornello that happens, that bookends the upper world. Think about that Apollo ritornello that happens to let us know gradually what we have been suspecting all along. Think about the way the chorus of the speaking of Ai Caso Acerbo turns into a choral exclamation and then turns into a choral ode. I mean, you couldn't be more musically aware and focused than Monteverdi is in the score. It never ceases to amaze. The more times you get to hear it, the better you love it, I think.
And it all happens in only 90 minutes. That's the amazing thing.
Amazing.
That it's just such a gem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. This is really fantastic to hear.
Well, it's a fantastic piece, and I'm really, really looking forward to it, and I'm sure everybody else is too.
I look forward to hearing it all very soon.
Me too. Thanks, Robert.
Pleasure.